The COP27 summit in Egypt is the fifth COP conference of parties to be hosted in Africa. But African states are not happy with the radical difference in how climate change is affecting poorer economies. You may have heard of this term, loss and damage compensation. This is one of the issues at the heart of the conversations on climate change as countries and people attend the COP summit in Egypt. But what does it mean? Climate justice activists say that countries that have contributed the least to greenhouse gas emissions are the worst affected by negative impact of climate change. Look at the flooding in Pakistan, Nigeria, Cameroon, and other parts of West Africa. Look at the worst drought in 40 years in Eastern Africa. Kenya's President William Ruto is himself calling for resources to developing countries to deal with the effects of climate change. COP26, which happened in 2021, was termed the best chance to save the planet. That call was for investors to save the planet. This time, the call is on wealthier countries. But will this actually work? Tonight we ask, is there any real hope that COP27 will translate to real change?
I think we, the people who see the urgency of the climate crisis, will make the leaders hear us at COP27.
I remain defiantly optimistic that we can be able to cause that change.
Well, my guests tonight, Elizabeth Wathuti, renowned climate activist and one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people, and Andrew Amadi, environmentalist and CEO of Kenya Renewable Energy Association. Let's get connected. Hello there, welcome to Kenya Connects from the BBC and KTN News, connecting Kenya to the world and the world to Kenya. I am Macharia Maina. The United Nations has given a grim warning that there is no credible way of limiting the rise in global warming. A new report talks of woefully inadequate action by the world's governments to keep the rise below 1.5 degrees Celsius. As leaders attend the COP27 summit in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, climate-related crises are still displacing millions from their homes and killing hope as food and fuel prices make life harder across the continent. Take a look.
Catastrophic floods in Nigeria have driven more than 1 million people from their homes this month. An example of the kind of extreme weather science says will become more common as our climate changes. And we had a second day of dire warnings from the United Nations, underscoring just how urgent the threat is. The world is on track for a rise of 2.8 degrees this century, with devastating consequences for millions of people, the report said.
Climate change is the crisis of our lifetime, is the defining issue of today's world. So, climate change remains a central priority in everything we do, and climate change must be a central priority for all governments, all companies, all cities, the civil society, everywhere. If we are not able to reverse the present trend that is leading to a catastrophe in the world, we will be doomed.
It's easy to forget the threat global warming presents when the weather's like this. But the blistering summer heat in Europe and around the world hit harvests of key crops. It's another reason we're paying so much for food at the moment, and another reason we should worry about our changing climate.
As we look at the changing climate, here are three of the big issues at the heart of COP27. Major economies are backsliding on a key promise made in COP26 to reduce the use of coal and other fossil fuels. The Russia-Ukraine war caused disruption in the energy industry. Fuel exports across Europe and much of the world dwindled, resulting in many economies increasing their use of coal. Compensation for losses from climate disasters. Eastern Africa has seen the worst drought in years. Middle East and West Africa have seen debilitating floods, increasing what experts call climate refugees. Affected nations are looking at the richer nations, who they say should compensate the effect from their industries. The aim is to boost a fund for loss and damage above $100 million.
Hearing no objections, it is so decided.
At COP26, countries promised to keep temperatures below 1.5 degrees. Only 24 out of 124 countries that were part of the agreement have made significant plans towards this. Kenya itself promised to increase forest cover to at least 10% by this year. Kenya Forest Service announced late last year that they achieved 12.1%, but temperatures are still rising and causing droughts in parts of the country. Ruto's government has put over 5 billion Kenya shillings into efforts to fight the drought in the north. But is this enough?
I don't think enough is being done yet, because the humanitarian crisis that we were describing at COP26 has only worsened 1 year later.
We have history behind us. We have all the crises that have been happening. What is the disconnect, Elizabeth?
I think the leaders are not listening, and the leaders are the ones who have failed to respond adequately. It's time to put justice at the center and recognize that justice means being able to also give support to these frontline communities.
Andrew, what kind of support do you think needs to be put into Kenya specifically to make it a climate smart or climate effective country?
I think one of the biggest problems we've had is exclusion. That a lot of the marginalization of the people that are suffering is because they're excluded from the formal economy. And as a result, when they cannot be able to get what they require from nature, they die.
How come we have the level of fatigue with the climate change issue as we do in society? You see it online every day.
Yeah, I think it's because people feel as though it's a distant issue, but right now we can no longer say it's a distant issue. We're seeing what is happening in different counties, especially even here in Kenya, where there has never been hunger before. People have had crops in plenty, but today we're seeing the crop failures happening. We're seeing droughts extending to counties that have not had it before.
Andrew, do you think it is an issue of communication when it comes to climate change fatigue?
I think so, yes. I think to some extent, because it is very technical. It has a lot of moving parts. It has a lot of terminology. There are a lot of abbreviations, and those just tire people. I think one of the things that is missed out is the economic, because everybody understands money. If you were to talk about it economically, vulnerability to climate is poverty, in a short sentence. So if we were to say the opportunity in climate is to make more money, then probably you'd get people's attention.
Please put that tangibly for us. Give us an example. What do you mean when you say put climate change into money?
Kenya is going through the worst drought. The most affected areas are northern part of Kenya, where communities are mostly pastoralist. Pastoralist communities rely on the economy from the animals. So, number one, the quick intervention would be take solar panels and pump water. Pump water, grow pasture. Grow pasture, convert it into animal feed. When you convert it into animal feed, you have a measure of food security. At the same time, you have water for the community. Now, that same food security, those pellets, is a green energy source. Supply it to the cement industry that is using coal, which we've just talked about as being part of the problem. Displace that coal, now you're mitigating and you are adapting at the same time. You do that many times over and integrate these communities, give them real equity. Do not use structural economic violence to get their land and to get their resources. Bring them in, put their telephone numbers, pay them directly.
And is this something that is happening on the ground? Because right now it sounds theoretic when you tell me the worst hit area in terms of drought in Kenya could actually produce energy and supply it to cement factories.
Yes, it's actually happening. It's happening, and at least we've even got the support from the highest level that the deputy president endorsed this as one of the interventions that can have a lasting impact.
I'd like you to hold that thought, Andrew. The global hair, wigs and extensions market report says the synthetic hair industry is worth over $6 billion and is expected to grow. But what impact is your set of braids having on the environment? BBC's Eunice Gatonye reports.
Kampala, the bustling capital of Uganda. The city council garbage collectors are hard at work. But it's not just the everyday household waste like cardboard, tins and plastic bottles that they have to deal with. There's a huge amount of discarded synthetic hair too. From this stop alone, they've emptied 6 bins of waste from salons. The hair wigs and extensions market is growing fast. As suppliers stock shop, the salons pack with women getting the latest weaving and braiding styles.
We mostly lean towards the synthetic hair because it's much more affordable and more available.
China is the largest exporter of synthetic hair at almost $2 billion a year. Between 2019 and 2020, the fastest growing importers of synthetic hair in Africa were Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa and Uganda. Rosemary runs a salon in Kenyatta Market in Nairobi, Kenya's capital. Hairdressers here are known for their skills in braiding synthetic hair.
We buy the braids from companies. In a week, we can have 100 clients. After cleaning the salon, we take the hair out, which is taken by the city council to landfill sites.
This is Dandora Dump. It's one of the largest landfill sites in Africa, about the size of 30 football pitches. And this is where the hair ends up.
About 1,500 tons of waste is brought to this landfill site every day. And part of it is this synthetic hair from salons around Nairobi, Kenya's capital. You see the smoke behind me? That's part of the waste being burned. Climate experts say they're concerned about the chemicals being released in the atmosphere, and more so that those in the hair and beauty industry, as well as their customers, may not be aware of the damage being caused by hair waste.
And it's not just burning the hair that's a problem.
It is not biodegradable, and because of the nature of its size, the tiny strands, it is easier for synthetic hair to break down into microplastics. And microplastics have their challenges. They get into our water bodies easily, they can get into the soil, they can get into our food chains. And there have been studies, even here within the Lake Victoria Basin, that microplastics have been found.
But there are some ways of tackling the problem. In Nairobi, these women are going through garbage bags to look for discarded hair extensions, which they will wash and sell on.
I make about $30 every month from selling this hair that I collect in the dump site. I have children who I clothe, feed and educate through this hair.
This certainly extends the life of the synthetic hair, but it will eventually end up back in the landfill. So, is there a way to make it even more sustainable? In Uganda, Julia Tusime makes hair extensions from banana fibers. The leathery fibers from banana residue are collected, processed and hung to dry for a week.
Using these organic stems gives us a product that is biodegradable. When you expose it to conditions that allow it to rot, it will rot.
Although the banana fiber is expensive, Juliet says she hopes it will at least make more people aware of the problem with the single-use synthetic hair, and that more awareness will mean more sustainable use of this beauty staple.
4 Peruvian officers disguised themselves as Marvel characters to carry out a drug raid in Peru. Spider-Man, Captain America, Thor and Black Widow took part in an operation dubbed Marvel, which targeted a specific house in Lima. The police detained 4 people during the raid after seizing 3,250 packages of cocaine paste as well as bags of cocaine and cannabis. Consumers are spending less on everything from video streaming to food shopping as the cost of living rises. But it appears many are not ready to cut back on dating just yet. The owner of Tinder says the number of paid subscriptions to the dating app rose 7% globally in July to September. Now, back to our discussion. Elizabeth, what are your thoughts concerning the story that we watched earlier on synthetic hair?
I think I'll stick to the same message that I mentioned, that every person and every industry has got a contribution to make when it comes to addressing the climate crisis. And even when we look at the issues of waste, it also has everything to do with the production itself. So it's a whole life cycle that ends up causing the plastic menace, for instance. And I think this is where every industry, every corporation, every government has got a contribution to make. And I was recently in Europe and I have visited a coal mine in Germany that's about to be extended. And we're talking about being in a crisis where countries like mine here in Kenya are facing this worst crisis, but yet developed nations are still continuing to invest more in fossil fuels. It's not the right thing to do, and it doesn't tell us that we're listening to young people, because we are the same people that are going to have to live longer with the consequences of these decisions.
Many of these countries are backsliding on the promise to draw back on fossil fuels and the use of coal. Is there hope, Andrew?
I choose to be optimistic that it can happen, and it is people like Elizabeth who are at the front, who are making the case day in, day out, chipping away at the old systems, that eventually, I think the future of this is the young people. The young people are the ones who are going to determine, because they are the future markets and they are the ones who are going to live longer with this situation. So the more that people start to demand, then the more that the change happens. It's going
the same
to be
young
gradual.
People who are being excluded from the board meetings.
Exactly.
And the meetings.
That's why they need to be at the board meetings. They need to be in the discussion. They need to be included in this. And I think when people realize their numbers and the strength and the ability to self-organize, then there will be transformation that will happen.
Elizabeth, what is the space of young people in this discussion?
I think young people are showing up leadership, showing the leaders what leadership looks like in this climate space.
How so?
It's not just about influencing how people are responding to the climate crisis, but it's the same young people that are leading initiatives and solutions on the ground with their communities, responding to help their communities deal with this crisis. But again, it's the same young people that are not being listened to, because we have been raising alarm and talking about the urgency and the need to address this crisis right now, because we are seeing lives and livelihoods are in balance, but yet the leaders are still continuing in the same old ways.
Let me bring in Andrew, where we talk about fossil fuels and what is the right thing to do as far as reducing fossil fuel use is concerned.
I think it's gradual. Number one is energy efficiency. You need to reduce the demand for energy. You need to reduce how much energy we require to generate in the first place. That's the quickest way to reduce it. Then number two, you can start with blending. You can blend up to 20% of coal with sustainable biomass without having to make any physical investment or change in the furnace or the operating system. And then number three is you need to get rid of that technology and have technology, for example, that can be able to run 100% on sustainable biomass. It's been done in Denmark, in the UK, in the Netherlands. The process has been going on, but it's also not going on with the urgency that is required. We seem to think we have the luxury of time.
When you talk about these solutions and you quote Western countries, how applicable is this talk for the person who is watching you right now here in Kenya?
Well, in Kenya, number one is that we need to remember that the level of emissions that we're talking about here, we don't produce that much yet. However, we need to consciously make a decision not to go into that direction, because if we go into that direction, there's no hope for the future. Africa will produce another 1 billion people in the next 30 to 40 years. That is the equivalent of China. And we are going into the middle class. We are going progressively. People are getting wealthier and people are consuming more. And if we consume on that tangent, then there's no hope.
What is your biggest expectation out of this summit, Elizabeth?
My biggest expectation, and one of the things that I have been championing for right now, is that the leaders are going to deliver on the need to have loss and damage finance, and in specific to have a loss and damage finance facility, in recognition that right now the impacts that people are facing almost defy human adaptation. People are no longer able to adapt to the total crop failures. People cannot adapt to losing their homes and losing their lives and losing their cultures. These are challenges and disasters that call for immediate help. And I think COP27 should be the COP where leaders actually show us that they're serious about this crisis, that they're serious about supporting the frontline communities and deliver on loss and damage finance.
I'd like to pick up on a word that you have just said, Elizabeth, challenges, and bring us to a different direction where deformities in animals are rare. And when they occur, they impair animal survival and majority die just after birth and at their early stages in life. In Kenya, especially in the traditional setup, animals born with deformities are considered a bad omen, and most are killed at birth to safeguard the community. But in Western Kenya, the Kitale Nature Conservancy has taken up caring for deformed domestic animals to raise awareness on why animals with deformities should be cared for. The BBC's Caroline B. reports.
I'm here at the Kitale Nature Conservancy to tell you how a special breed of animals, that is animals with deformities or disabilities, have found a home. From afar, it may look like a regular animal sanctuary, but here lives mysterious animals, those with mutations. Most are rejected by farmers or the community. The conservationist behind this park wanted to give these animals a safe haven. He's been doing so for 2 decades now.
And especially I had a lot of problems with my neighbors. Initially they thought I would die. Anytime there was something like the absence of rain, they used to blame it on the presence of these animals.
He explains what deformities some of these animals live with.
Look at this one. The vulva is supposed to be somewhere, but now nature has placed, mutation has placed it here.
The retired teacher buys these animals at double or triple their selling price to discourage their owners from killing them. We set out to speak to one of the farmers in Zoia, 35 kilometers away from here. This is the homestead of Festus Wavomba, one of the farmers whose sheep gave birth to 2 lambs, one with 4 legs and another with 5 legs. Wavomba sold the mutant sheep to the Conservancy last December and kept the other, which has twin lambs now.
My neighbor saw the lamb and said we should kill it. I refused and then asked him, what if it was a human being? Would we kill it?
He told me that let me rear the animal for the time until it finished the suckling, and he sold me at a good amount, around 9,000.
Back at the Conservancy, I meet the park's vet. He tries to explain why such genetic abnormalities occur.
Number one is genetic makeup, whereby that code within the genes is maybe recorded twice, because that message may report you want a cow with 2 horns. And then after a very short time, the same message is repeated. We have had an animal with a hernia. And this one results when an animal, after birth, this part of the navel is never closed.
Deformities in animals are rare, and when they occur, they impair an animal's survival. Majority of them die at birth or at the early stages of their lives. Some of the animals with extreme deformities that once lived here have since died. Tourists explore the park at a fee, which also boasts of abundant wildlife, a nature trail, a botanical garden, and regular domestic animals.
I didn't know that there is animals with disability. I thought it only happens to the humans.
It's not an omen. These are just biological things that are happening.
Very little is understood about such animals, and Mr. Ndura hopes that one day scientists will flock here to study these gene mutations and possibly provide answers.
Based on that, I'd like to ask you your final thoughts. What did you connect with the most on the show?
I think the important thing is the inclusion in the conversation, the importance, and then the communication of how to be able to break this down so that people understand it's my thing and they can be able to take both personal responsibility and hold those who can make the decisions accountable.
Elizabeth?
I think it's the diversity of voices and solutions. So what we need right now is collective action, just the understanding that every person can make a contribution. And if we all make a contribution, regardless of where we are and what levels of power or resources we have access to, then we can make that change happen. But it has to start now.
Thank you to my guests for being on the show this week. And thank you for watching. That's all we had for you today on Kenya Connects from the BBC and KTN News. You can catch this and other episodes of Kenya Connects on the BBC website. Just search Kenya Connects. I've been your host, Macharia Maina. And until next time, Goodbye for now.